everyone at this new episode of Let's Talk AI. I'm super happy to be here today with Jaime Oliver Huidobro. Jaime, how are you doing?
Cool. Thank you for having me.
Likewise, super happy to have you. I have many questions. I think I have many questions in all the episodes, but that's great. For everyone who is tuning in, we're on Let's Talk AI. Welcome on the show if it's the first time. Basically, we deep dive into data and AI with experts and professionals in the field. And we try to understand better and have a better 360 vision of what's going on. Today, we're with Jaime. So maybe, Jaime, for the people who might not know you, could you introduce yourself in a few sentences?
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone. Thanks for having me here. So basically, my name is Jaime. Basically I like to describe myself as an applied scientist. I have like lots of interest in my career. I've gone from physics to AI. And I currently, my interests are more like the intersection of tech and sustainability. I work at Clarity AI as a lead data scientist. And I've also kind of recently come back from MIT from a postdoctoral research stay. So yeah, I'm sure we'll deep dive in those topics afterwards.
Awesome. Yes, and I think that the paper is out, correct?
It will be out very soon. We'll make sure to link it in the description as well afterwards when it's ready.
Awesome. So we'll discuss about this paper that you've been working on. Okay, so we have an idea of who you are. Maybe before doing maybe a short retrospective, I would love to ask you about your current mission or what drives you today. What are you interested in? What are you doing lately in your working hours? Can you share maybe what I like to call your state of the art? And by that, I mean, your interests. What do you do? And what are you interested? Like, what kind of mission are you
Mhm.
driving at Clarity AI or more in general?
Mhm. So basically, I think my mission work-wise is very product-oriented, right? So basically, what I want to achieve is to maximize the impact in the world that we can unlock through data science and AI applications. So more down to earth, that means working at Clarity. We are trying to bring sustainability to financial markets and also to other market participants. And we are doing that through different, AI applications. So in my day to day, basically, I try to bridge those gaps between, how our clients are trying to integrate sustainability in their decision making, and how can we bridge that gap using AI. Data is kind of all the underlying juice to achieve this. So I also I'm a very data nerd in that sense. So lots of when we say AI, it's basically the buzzword right now, but historically I've also been very interested in kind of the econometric side and more kind of the interpretation behind all those data insights.
Hmm. Awesome. Yeah. AI is
Mhm.
a very trendy word. And
I
there is
mean,
good to it
I'm
and there
sure
is
like
bad.
yeah, let's see how this recording sounds in like 2 years time, and maybe we go from data science to machine learning to AI, and then in 2 years we'll have another word for all of these.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in the end, it's all related to data, like MLOps, data
Exactly.
scientists, ML engineers, AI engineers. Basically, we're manipulating data and we're doing things with it. Um, but okay, super interesting. So I might ask you further questions on this mission and on Clarity. Um, but could we make a quick retrospective on key moments of your career, maybe from university to some professional experiences? Can you share an
Yep.
overview of where you've been at and some lessons maybe that you've learned along the way?
Yeah, sure, sure. So basically, I started my career, as many current data scientists. I am a physicist by training, so I studied physics in Madrid, Spain. So basically, my interests were kind of like how the universe works, right? Like I've been very, a science guy from the beginning. But then, at the end of my university, um, I really struggled to see the social impact of the things that I was working on, right?
Mm.
So I knew a lot of particle physics, cosmology, but those are like very far things from the day to day. So I went on to study kind of masters in kind of applied math, basically. Um, and then that brought me to kind of studying economics, right? So I did another master's in economics as a way of it's the physics of the people, right? It's like how societies interact and trade and structure. Um, and so like from that side, I went to kind of from the more abstract to the more applied things. During this period, I already started working on some consulting, data science consulting. So basically, projects of like, churn for like, the utility sector or things like that. Um, and then at the end of my master's, I found this company that was just founded. So, and this company is Clarity AI, right? So, Clarity AI is a Madrid-based startup. It was founded in 2017, and I joined in 2018 when they were only 20 people, so it was very small. With the mission of bringing impact to markets. So that means as we all know, basically we have a huge challenge as humanity of climate change being the biggest issue that we've faced, you know, in a lot of time. Um, and this challenge is due to the fact that we found ourselves in a prisoner's dilemma type of situation where we are waiting for others to act and to take sustainability into account in their decision making, but we're not going to do it ourselves first, right?
Hmm.
And so with this problem in mind, what Clarity is trying to do is to bring sustainability information into the market's decision making. So that means whenever investors are gonna build their portfolios, they need to take into account what are the companies that are more polluting, right? But not only on the sustainability side, but also on the social side. So, for instance, what's the women employee share of the companies in your portfolio, right? Um, what Clarity is building is these ESG rating scores. So basically, environmental, social governance, and we provide a software as a service tool for investors to to take into account these decisions. My job there has been like since the beginning is to basically fill in that information. So basically, how much tons of CO2 emissions do companies emit? Build those scores, extract that information, um, and provide that information to clients. So that's been like 6 years. In the way, I basically did my PhD. So it was an industrial PhD within the company. It's basically all around data science for ESG problems. And then this project ended up in the summer of 2023. I presented my PhD thesis in University Carlos III of Madrid. And then I went on to visit our collaborators are at MIT. So that's kind of Roberto Rigobon, who's the main professor. He's a well-known economics professor for ESG ratings. So their most famous paper is it's called Aggregate Confusion. It's basically the Aggregate Confusion project at MIT. So what they were doing was basically try to see the correlation among different ESG ratings. So the product that Clarity is building, there are other agencies building that product. And what you see is literally, lower correlations that you would expect, right? And so here's where I basically went to work with them to kind of understand, what are some of the data discrepancies that justify this low correlation. And yeah, I'll tell you about more later, but that's kind of where my research ended up. So now I'm basically back in Madrid trying to, back at Clarity, trying to assess kind of different innovation ways that we can, serve our clients better, get better data sets, and kind of bring in back to markets better. Yeah.
Awesome, amazing. Thanks for this entire trip around this key moment. I think I'm curious about many things, but I think we can dive directly into this paper and your experience at MIT and you working with this professor. So you mentioned um, correlations that were lower than we could expect. Could you maybe share more information regarding insights around the work that you've been doing
Mhm.
there, and
Yeah.
maybe like some examples so that we can understand better maybe some insights of the results and conclusions of your work there?
Yeah. Yeah. So as I said, the financial industry is trying to find its way towards, including sustainability criteria in their decision making, right?
Hmm.
Um, in order to do that, you basically need ESG ratings. So these are kind of similar to credit risk ratings,
Hmm.
but they take into account sustainability criteria. What the project they were working on, or they already worked in the past, is basically these ratings do not correlate across different rating agencies, and that is due to different factors. So one is kind of differences in methodologies, but also there are differences in the underlying data that the different rating agencies are using. Right?
Hmm.
So the data space for the sustainability, for the sustainability of companies is like really complex and really noisy, because companies are actually not forced to disclose their information,
Hmm.
and they are not forced to go through third party assessments of the information they disclose. Right?
Hmm.
So what we went and like this goes, the work that I've been doing there is basically, okay, let's analyze of the quality of the data that we are using for these ratings.
Hmm.
Um, we initially were looking into, okay, when a company is disclosing that they are going to be net zero by 2050, they
Hmm.
commit to what they call the Science Based Targets Initiative.
Okay.
They're going to be net zero by 2050. Um, does that show on the data? Turns out it's not that clear. We don't find such a signal, or it's not that strong. It's fainter than we expected.
Hmm.
A stronger signal that we found was related to companies that went through a third party assessment of their sustainability report.
Hmm.
What we found is that these companies that let the police into their house
Hmm.
were reporting more emissions than their peers, right? Um, this is this is kind of to be expected, but it's something that is not taken into account when we go when the financial industry is taking these decisions.
Hmm.
And so what this means is that you will provide a lower performance score to the company that is going through this third party assessment and is like kind of like doing things correctly. Right?
Hmm.
So it's kind of this, tragedy of like, I'm trying to do things the right way, but I'm getting penalized for that. Um, um, and even what we saw is that this good faith of companies translated into better performance in terms of like further decreases in CO2 emissions. And so, you know, this all leads to kind of a question of like, are we measuring the right metrics when we try to build ESG scores, right?
Mm,
Should we should we look further into kind of the intentionality of companies more than the current outcomes that they are having or they are reporting that they are having, right?
mm,
Um, so it's really interesting that now the regulation in this space is going towards, more towards mandatory reporting of these metrics, but also, mandatory assessment of the data you are reporting. And hopefully, we get to a place where companies are going to have to, go through these rigorous assessments the same way they do with their financial reports, right?
mm-hmm,
If you lie in your financial report, um, it's basically considered fraud, right?
mm-hmm.
But you can lie in your sustainability report and you will not be held accountable for that. So hopefully we see some changes in that space soon.
Mm. Awesome. And so coming back to Clarity AI, now that you've seen that, does Clarity AI counts as one of the companies that provide third-party assessments, or is it like more the products that you mentioned, software as a service, that that help financial decision making, adding more visibility on these ESG metrics? Is it the second one
Mhm.
or the first one? Or do you
It's
also do?
rather it's rather a mix. So basically, the vision for Clarity, so the main vision is what we call the Clarity building blocks, right? This means we are a tech company and we
Mm-hmm,
want to integrate sustainability into every stakeholder decision making
mm-hmm,
process. What that means is that we need to, provide investors with the right context
mm-hmm,
for their decisions, right? And this is kind of the current core of what we're doing. But in the future, what we want to do is basically go for integrate in consumers' decision making, for example, right? So
mm-hmm,
we are already integrated into Klarna, which is an e-commerce platform where you can buy kind of like retail like consumer products.
mm-hmm,
We are integrating kind of in with banks or like that type of information for final consumers to take sustainability into account.
mm-hmm,
We also want to start working with companies and help them in their journey towards like better reporting and better disclosure of their metrics.
mm-hmm,
um, it's true that there's a question on like there's a conflict of interests between getting the data from companies and
mm-hmm,
then sharing that data with other stakeholders, um, like building scores with that data. So um, in the future, when we go that road, we need to build a wall, like a very like we need to be able to prove that such a wall exists, and then there's no like conflict of interest between the two sides.
hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think like the goal is to provide everyone with kind of the right context, governments as well, right? So um, we need to work with governments to make them understand what the most polluting industries in their country are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who are the main actors? So yeah, um, that's kind of that's kind of the vision for the company.
Awesome. Okay, I have two main paths that I would like to explore from there.
Mhm.
Um, the first one being from a business perspective and like the offering of the company, and the other path is from a data science perspective
Mhm.
and like more building, creating, modeling, and so on. So, which way do you want to go?
I mean, I think whatever it's more useful for the audience, but I think um, as I said, I always like to, link, the product side with then the technical solution.
Uh-huh.
Um, so yeah, maybe it makes sense for the story to just go first from the business side.
Awesome.
Um,
I was curious. Okay, so here are my thoughts. As as those metrics, as being a sustainable companies, I mean, I assume there
mhm,
are some laws. I'm not super aware of like the what companies need to do and so on, but like you said, there is no fraud if I lie about my sustainability data,
yeah,
and
not as of today.
not as of today. And that's interesting because it can really mean a big change for your company in the future, in my opinion.
Mhm,
I mean, so here's my question. First of all, here's what I think. It seems hard for me to like see how can business or tech products related to sustainability when there are no when so far we can see mandatory rules, and it really depends on the business's intentions. So it feels like this lower a lot the market, and the possibilities, like opportunities of growth for a company like
mhm,
Clarity. But I know there
yeah,
is more to it, but this is kind of the like basic point of
yeah,
view.
yeah. No,
So
it's a very interesting question. I think every product that is related to sustainability
hmm,
goes through this question of like, okay, but at the end of the day, like, what does this mean for my bottom line? Like, am I getting a better product? Am I
hmm,
getting like, in this case, as an investor, am I getting more returns because
hmm,
I'm investing in green assets? Um, so yeah, definitely, like, it's a big thing. I think at the end of the day, you need to be able to. So there are two ways you can go about it.
hmm,
The US way, it's basically, markets will regulate, and so um, in a future where there is going to be a carbon tax, and we are going to make carbon intensive industries disappear. You need to be prepared for that, and that is kind of what we call the financial materiality,
hmm,
right? This means that as an investor, I should be worried about investing in polluting assets. I should move to greener assets because in the future the polluting assets will depreciate.
hmm,
That's kind of one way of seeing it. Personally, there are questions around, okay, but then you're selling your shares of that polluting company to another person. So like, did you really make an impact in the world? And actually, there are certain studies pointing to the fact that, like, maybe there's not much impact in that side. But then, so like, that's kind of on the financial materiality side. From the impact materiality, there's the, okay, I'm just like investing in green assets because I believe that we should um, like, fight against climate change. That's kind of like, okay, you're not getting a premium for your green investing, but like, you do it because you want to. Um, and then there's a third, but like more important, kind of materiality, which is governments are starting to regulate these types of markets, right? So, for instance, in the EU, there's the SFDR law, which, you know basically, it's and of course, like, I'm talking about like things that are kind of a bit out of my field of expertise, but there are laws around, if you're a fund, you should disclose whether your index, or like the products that you're selling meet certain sustainability criteria, and you should disclose that to your clients, right?
hmm,
And so what this translates into is, okay, but then companies should start disclosing, right? And there's this new CSRD regulation in the European Union, where companies with more than 250 employees, I believe it is, they're going to have to start to report all these metrics, right? And all
Mm-hmm.
these metrics are going to be public, so society is going to know how many tons of CO2 you are emitting as a company.
Mm.
And by the way, like that regulation has already started. Like it's being enforced this year. Is the first year that it's being enforced,
Mm-hmm.
and then I believe in a couple of years, companies will also be enforced to go through these third-party assessment processes
Mm-hmm.
that in our research we prove that kind of are so important, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we are seeing this trend
Mm-hmm.
in the regulation and in the market. And what this means for from the business perspective is there are processes
Mm-hmm.
that different stakeholders in society need to go through. And so here is where you can leverage technology to basically make those processes more efficient, and help help your clients go through this, right?
Mm.
So if you think about CSRD regulation, um, like if you think about a company with 300 people,
Mm-hmm.
and this company has to disclose around hundreds of sustainability metrics,
Mm-hmm.
um, you have to dedicate a significant proportion of your resources as a company to have disclosed these metrics, right?
Yeah.
And that
Mm.
is an issue, and that is an issue that you can solve through technology.
Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah, it's like today people will companies will pay a lot in audit or accountability, and like just to
Yeah,
like have
exactly.
yeah, just financial departments are big, so one way to grow if it gets regulated, but that is a like geopolitical conflict maybe, because some countries will have, I mean, it is already happening, but we can see like some laws that for example are applied in the EU or in the US that won't apply to China. And so
Yep.
I wonder how the global market can react when when some regions of the world are having those more complex regulations, which are for a common good, but are directly competing with countries that don't have any of
Yep.
those specific things to report. Like we could think of like one agreement global for
Yep.
everyone. But like, yeah, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. Like, I think that global agreement, um, it's basically what we expected to see at the COP, right?
Yeah.
So basically, everyone coming together and agreeing to solve the problem. Um, I don't think we are there yet, although I don't know. Like, I'm more optimistic on that side.
Hmm.
I do think like certain countries have committed to certain actions, even if they are not enough. But maybe we're like, I don't know. I hope we see more and more coming in the next years.
Hmm.
Um, but also another another way of helping this kind of carbon leakage, through basically supply chains,
Mm-hmm.
is that there are regulations, but also like certain ways of thinking about it, right? So when you are doing your carbon accounting, you have basically you can account for your what you call scope 1 emissions, which are the
Mm-hmm.
direct emissions of your company.
Mm-hmm.
But you can also account for your scope 2 emissions, which are the emissions related to your electricity consumption, and then also your scope 3 emissions, which are the emissions related to the supply chain of the company, right? Uh, so this piece is really important because if you are a global company and your supply chain is localized in like developing countries that
Hmm.
are not as not as like uh, regulatory or like progressing in the climate change space, you can actually use demand power to just like make them change, right? And if
Hmm.
you're not up to the standards that I require in my supply chain, then I can kind of put some pressure on you. Um, and that's kind of like another way of thinking about it. Of course, scope three emissions are kind of mandatory, are going to be included in these CSRD regulations.
Hmm.
Also, the SEC climate rule is thinking about this. Yeah, so there are kind of ways, but of course, we go back to the prisoner's dilemma type of situation of like, I'm a developing country, and it's like, you guys already polluted, so like, okay, just go ahead and decarbonize, and I'll just like keep going until
Yeah.
you make me stop.
Yeah, this is not a
It's
it's
interesting.
not a new problem, but yeah, I was curious to have your vision on those because okay, so now if we go on a model, um, okay, so if we go on your current role, so you're a lead data scientist. Um, I would like to know maybe if you can share about what does it mean at Clarity AI to be a lead data scientist, and more in general, if you can share some examples of your work, um, and maybe we can get into a bit of details in terms of how do you go about
Yeah.
problem solving and how does this work help the project. But maybe first, like the vision of the role and a broader vision of what you do could be very interesting, I think.
Mhm. So yeah, I think in my case it's kind of a bit peculiar since I've been jumping kind of from more like an academic role into
Yeah.
kind of a more product role. So I think the value. So what that means for me is that I'm kind of more connected to the first principle thinking and like trying to solve problems that are kind of haven't conceptual problems that we haven't thought of before, and then trying to innovate from there.
Okay.
Of course, there are kind of there are other data scientists, and I report to other data like chief data scientist kind of position. Um, but my current role, it's a lot around kind of identifying where the gaps are and then trying to bridge those with the kind of the technologies that we have in the team.
Hmm.
So I'll give you kind of examples of like how current things that we're doing at Clarity, so that you can kind of understand. So
Awesome.
basically, the problems that we are trying to solve at Clarity can be kind of thought of in kind of three axes, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one is kind of data availability. So we need to have the larger set of data set that we can serve our clients with.
Mm-hmm.
That means collecting data from mostly corporate sustainability reports, but also kind of other sources such as news articles or more aggregated tabular kind of like data sets that we get our hands on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, um, Usually there's kind of a lot of NLP involved in that, right? And this space is kind of like evolving a lot since like RAG technologies are being more and more easily available.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of there's a lot of evolution on that space.
Okay.
Um, and also, like there are some companies, of course, that are not reporting their sustainability metrics, and they're not even like putting out their sustainability report.
Mm-hmm.
And here is where we kind of use the data completion approach, which is more related to learning models that try to learn from what similar companies are reporting, then based on certain features related to your industry, geography, size of your operations, etc., etc. We'll try to learn that relationship and then extrapolate to non-reporting companies.
Okay.
Um, yeah, that kind of like that covers kind of the first pillar, which is the data availability. Then you have another side which is related more to data quality.
Mm-hmm.
And this means kind of identifying. So, as I've explained before, the data we work with is really really noisy. It has like different issues related to reporting, but also like kind of in the collection process there can be human errors or like you know unit conversion errors and so on. So what we have is basically AI-based reliability processes that
Mm-hmm.
detect kind of when a data point does not fit within the expected distribution, and then we can flag that and just like curate our data sets. So that's kind of another big thing that we do. And I think another one that is kind of becoming more and more important as like these regulations and these like the market in general is going for more data availability and more data quality.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're moving into the regime of we need to provide more data actionability, right?
Mm-hmm.
What this means is we can build kind of explainability tools around like especially around generative AI, right? Which is, in my opinion, is more of a UI tool than anything else. So basically,
Yeah.
instead of like showing a complex database of like lots of numbers, complex information, graphs, analysis, etc.,
Mm.
we're moving into this regime of like, okay, just chat through a natural language interface with your data, and then we'll be able to kind of automatically provide those insights for you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and actually, there's been a recent press release around our chat capabilities within Clarity. I think you can find that on LinkedIn or like I'm sure in the website. So yeah, there's a lot happening on that side, and of course we have to. I think it's a moment where we have to keep our eyes open for like a lot of things that are happening in the industry.
Mm.
Um, so it's kind of a interesting moment to be working on these type of problems.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. I'm curious about the companies that you work with. So, for example, you mentioned that one of the use case that you can do is if a company haven't really started to predict for say those metrics, um, and they don't have much data, they don't have much resources, you can use other companies that are similar and try to extrapolate to them based on like specific information that they provide. And
Mhm.
so I'm curious. So this seems to be like a regression problem for those
Mhm.
specific metrics. And but what I'm thinking is we need a lot of other companies from whom we have the data to be able to predict the ones that we don't. And so I was wondering if you had some insights regarding like this challenge of how can I solve a regression problem if I might be missing some data, or maybe you have a lot of data, or like does Clarity have like a lot of partnership with companies to have like a lot of access? I think the part of accessing the data is very interesting. Feel free to comment on any of those.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, the accessibility part is kind of where we are. There's a lot of efforts in like building these retrieval augmented generation system of like like giving this PDF report what are the sustainability numbers related to these reports, and like this is providing us access with like many more like thousands of data points that can be collected. Of course, like there's always kind of humans in the loop, over like supervising these type of models.
Mm,
But that is kind of like one way we get access to like a bigger database.
mm,
Another way, of course, is kind of like partnering with other data sources, kind of like partners that we have to kind of get our first kind of training data set, right?
yeah.
Then I think like technical insights on the regression problem of like, based on the features, what are your emissions? So we typically depart from a universe of like some thousands of companies that are
Okay.
actually reporting.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're trying to extrapolate to a universe of like all the public companies in the world, which is around 50,000 companies.
Okay.
Um, of course, there's a problem of correlated missingness
Mm-hmm.
that you have because like the biggest companies are the ones that are reporting kind of your y variable,
Mm-hmm.
but then on the x variable you will have like big companies, you have all the x features, but
Mm-hmm.
then as you go for smaller and smaller companies,
Yeah.
which are the ones that are not reporting their sustainability
Yeah.
metrics, you will start missing some of those features related to number of employees, or like your company market cap, or your company value added, or
Yeah.
your different operations across different industries.
Mm-hmm.
um, so it's interesting in that sense that it's so the data set has these kind of biases, and then we of course have done a lot of work in terms of like understanding how to solve these using like propensity score matching analysis, and then like um, making sure we validate the model where we have fewer data as we go for smaller and smaller companies.
Hmm.
Of course, I think it's interesting to mention that we at Clarity, I don't think we have a culture of trusting the AI no matter what. So we always have our team of experts that kind of review the outcomes of the models,
Mm-hmm.
and we always have kind of a human in the loop, just like validating those outcomes and then seeing where the model fails, and then that serves as kind of like a learning so that we can have close that loop and get better and better. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that was very valuable. Yeah, and it really feels that the smaller the companies, the more different the benchmark needs to be to evaluate them, because we won't have the same information as big public companies, it feels. Or maybe there is like a threshold where above a specific metrics we will apply, like we have like maybe above a specific metric you find that the most relevant metrics and variables to compare are x and y, and for like below a specific number or size or something, those variables are different.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
I
Do you
mean,
want
I
to
think
go?
you have to, yeah, you have to be very careful in these settings to just like, um, as you get fewer and fewer data, I think you get into the kind of the small data kind of regime, and there you have to be very cautious about like regularizing your model properly so that it doesn't kind of overfeed the five data points that you have, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's very important to kind of like, um, make sure you look at all the different failure modes of your model, and then of course we kind of use like the classical ML flow type of like, let's log all the metrics
Mm,
across all the different tests that we have
mm,
defined with like the experts in these subjects. And so we define kind of a lot of metrics related to, are you able to rank the companies within an industry in the right order, or like do you have like an overall ranking throughout all the industries that makes sense.
yeah.
We also think a lot in terms of like um, um, eh, so like you can think about like estimating these emissions in absolute levels,
Mm-hmm.
but also you can work in terms of intensities. What we call intensity is basically emission levels relative to the size of the company. So
Okay.
it's a measure of like the technology that the company has, and it makes the problem much more comparable in terms of like
Yeah.
you're not predicting size of the company, you're predicting technology.
Mm,
Um, and then you can use that to extrapolate, of course, to the total number of emissions.
yeah.
So
Awesome.
yeah, there's a lot of like details to the kind of um, yeah. level of detail that you can get.
Yeah, I can imagine. No, but that's super interesting. And well, speaking of metrics and evaluations and so on, how do you make sure on this problem or like other problems? How do you make sure that you compare how good your model is? So I would assume that yeah, you can use different metrics. Do you have insights on metrics to use? Or because it really feels that this problem, and I know that you're doing different things. For example, you mentioned using RAG systems to like gather more insights from like different papers, which seems very interesting in terms of like getting data, applying RAG systems to generating more data sets. That's a very
Mhm,
interesting use case of RAGs.
mhm.
So maybe you can comment on that, but also curious to know about how do you approach improving model system, which metrics to use, like if you have some insights or experience
Yeah,
regarding those things.
yeah. So on the RAG side, I think we are so basically how we are working as of today is we have a collection platform
Hmm.
that we call internally Igloo.
Okay.
So it's basically a platform where we have kind of the PDFs, and then we have human collectors, and then we
Hmm.
have NLP collectors, right?
Okay.
So there's a what we call a consensus mechanism where we compare always. So we have several different actors collecting the same data point,
Hmm.
and then this consensus mechanism makes sure that okay, I have the NLP model and a collector. Did they collect the same data points? Yes. Then that data point is kind of passed through. Or
Okay.
like I have two human collectors in another case, right? They get the same one, yes, and then we pass that. If they don't, then we compare that to a third collector or to the language model, right? And so in that sense, you can think about the RAG system as kind of a you know a more efficient way of collecting the data, but of course we don't assume perfect perfect extraction because we like at this moment we can't.
Hmm.
What we are currently working on is basically on surrogate models. I don't know if you pronounce that way. um, so basically a second model that is able to predict the quality of that extraction,
Hmm.
and then ideally what you would get is basically an estimate for okay, these particular subset of data points that you extracted,
Hmm.
um, these are 100% correct, right?
Okay.
Or like 99%, right? And
Right.
then those data points you can kind of basically bring them directly into your system without further validation.
Okay.
So then you can get like you know further increases in efficiency.
Hmm.
Of course, you're always like playing with these like statistical errors, and like you will never get 100% accuracy. Um, and that is kind of why it's very important for us to have like always this human in the loop.
Hmm.
Um, on the kind of metrics side, in my experience, you can't judge the models just like using one metric. So like it's good to have one KPI.
Hmm.
But then in terms of like, do you use quadratic error or just like MSLE or R squared?
Hmm.
Um, you know, like it actually like it's a question of like you just have to look throughout, and every metric will tell you whether you are kind of in the right order of magnitude, or like does your model explain the whole variance, or
Hmm.
are you in kind of getting the right um, answers? But
Hmm.
like, yeah, there's not like one metric to rule them all, I believe.
Which makes sense. Um, Perfect. Okay. Yeah, I really like this. I really like the fact that you have this entire system of validating data, like validating the data extraction process, and that you use
Mhm.
different systems in different ways to maximize the data quality and the volume of the data that you will later on use for different use cases. Awesome.
Mhm. I
So
mean, I want one thing that I always think about is that we so because at Clarity we need to provide answers to our clients that are kind of
yeah,
100% reliable. So
okay.
what this translates into is that machine learning and AI technologies
Mm,
are a way to achieving that goal more efficiently,
mm-hmm.
but ultimately you almost always have to get that human in the loop that makes sure that you get that check of like, okay, this is correct.
Yeah,
And so it's about like how you build those systems as efficiently as possible.
yeah, yeah. And here,
Which by the way, just one, like if you think about this, our competitors, how they do this is basically they hire 600 analysts and they go one by one with all the reports, with all the human error that entails, right? Because
yeah,
humans also make errors.
yes,
Um, and so it's about kind of efficiency and the algorithmic quality that you get from these types of systems.
awesome. And one thing that can very useful is that when we like for the RAG systems example, we can really get the sources. So instead of going through an entire PDF and going into the sections and getting this data, I can directly even like I don't know. We can think of a UI that is further like it's more than a chatbot or it's a chatbot, but you also have access to like maybe you're retrieving five chunks of a document or of your
Mhm.
entire vector database, and so you can have a look on that so you know which parts of the document it retrieved, and you also have the references of pages, paragraphs, and so on, so you can easily verify the information and on different.
Definitely. I think you touch a very interesting point, which is if you think about more broadly, there's this fear for like human task automation, right? And if,
Mhm,
like the first thing you think about when you use these type of systems to collect data is like, okay, let's automate the collector's work,
mhm.
right? Let's remove the collector from the equation.
Yeah.
What we are seeing is that it's more about human augmentation and about providing humans with this kind of co-pilot mode where your job is like just made more easily, but
Mhm.
then you as a human are the one just like taking the ultimate decision and like you know getting that, okay, this is correct, check. So it's I think it's interesting to think about like augmentation versus automation and how AI will play into that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And when I think of AI, I never think about something that is going to rule us all. Yeah, I really think that it's an extension of what humans are capable of. And it really, like when we invented the first technologies, it really allows it to focus on deeper problem, more creative tasks. And yeah, I see them as like powerful tools that enhance us and augment us more than anything else. I don't,
Hmm.
I'm not, but that's a very interesting thing in that I always like to comment, but I am not. I think that one thing that is important is people adopting those technologies to being able to perform on the same level as people who are using those technologies. So when, if let's say I augment my capacities using tools like this, then my output will augment whatever job I do. And I believe that there will be a delta that can be measured compared to people who don't adopt these technologies for any reason. Uh, but that's another topic. But if you want to comment on that,
It's super interesting. Yeah, I think there are already actually academic studies on like productivity enhancements of using these copilot systems, not only on coding but also kind of on consultants solving type of like consultant questions. And and overall, what I've seen is that yes, you have there are productivity increases related to the use of AI. These productivity increases are more effective for low skilled workers than high skilled workers. So like if you're a high skilled worker, you already know how to do your job, right? And you will do it very efficiently. If
Mm.
you're just like a junior person entering the role, then you will of course like get a lot of value out of like an AI system that helps you perform better.
Yeah.
But then another interesting thing that I think it's coming up recurrently is there's more output, but then there's like less diversity in the outputs that we get from using these AI systems, right? So um, in this consultants study that I'm mentioning, I'm forgetting the name of the authors, but maybe we can link it in the description afterwards. But
Mm-hmm.
basically, they were seeing that, right? Like that specific, you're getting more outcome per hour worked,
Mm-hmm.
but then the diversity in the answers in the solutions proposed was like very narrow. And so I think there's that point of like, what's the productivity versus creativity trade-off, and what's a human role on that.
Productivity versus creativity. Huh. Interesting.
Again, not the expert on this, so
No, I like it. If I'm thinking about, I feel that productivity is to me one one thing that allow me to be creative or to be inventive or to build things.
mm,
Yeah, I look into that, and I'll definitely look into these papers. So you mentioned one thing that I wanted to comment. Maybe this will be the last point that we'll touch on. It's data actionability.
mhm,
So just before asking you about data actionability, I was curious to ask you about what are the companies that you have in mind that are doing good with AI in the world. So I'm thinking AI for good, but I was curious because you're in this sector, and maybe you can like name competitors or companies that are different. But what do you have in mind,
mhm.
or what have you seen that are doing good with technology and AI in the world? It can be like on the healthcare sector, sustainability, whatever. Like, do you have names? Do you have things that marked you?
I think that's a very interesting question. Definitely. So on my sector, I know Climate Change AI, which is an initiative launched from MIT.
Okay.
Priya Danti is kind of the researcher leading that, and um, it's a company that's also basically a community of people just like working on AI, climate related problems.
Yeah.
And I think it's a very useful resource if people from the community just want to find things to work on, or like um, you know get challenges, think about new ideas. I think that's a very useful. So basically, you can log in and there's like a forum where people just discuss interesting topics. So
Mm-hmm.
I recommend that. Of course, like I mean, there are like lots and lots of startups using. I mean, couple come to mind in terms of like making the reporting of these CSRD requirements, right? There are
Mm-hmm.
a number of startups.
Awesome. Coming back to data actionability, and that will be the last topic I'll ask you about. So we've understood different parts. Obviously, there are more, but like data collections, building models, even though we discussed only like regression models to do like specific tasks. But there are more to it, obviously. But in terms of actionability, this is something that really interests me because when we think of this industry, at least, it really feels that we need to track to then take better actions, but the actions, like this actionable part of all this work that is being done in terms of getting the metrics right and having a clear vision, and the vision that is as close to reality as possible. So how do you approach actionability on the project that you're
So for
building and in
me,
general?
mm, yeah. So for me, there's always been this concept of like sustainability being too complex, and then that's kind of one of the main reasons why people are not engaging with it, right? It's like, science is complex, and yeah, people don't relate to it because it's just like too much.
Yeah.
So I think there's a general exercise that we need to do as a society of like translating those insights of
Hmm.
the IPCC report. It's kind of an important UN kind of document where they release kind of all the evidence for climate change. But then you need to be able, and I think they do a really good job on this, but like you need to be able to communicate that to the general public and like make everyone aware of what the real impact of climate change is on our lives, right? So
Hmm.
there's kind of that communication aspect to it. And so I think for us, what that means is, um, we have a lot of data, we have a lot of insights, we have too many too many insights, right? So going back to kind of how you can use generative AI to as a UI tool to interact with your data in an easier way, right? And so I think we need to be able to build systems that just like translate this infinity of like data and insights
Mm.
into just like plain natural language, of like, okay, this is how your portfolio looks like. These are the worst performing companies. These are other companies that are kind of like maybe you can substitute them with. And so like just going back to the human that is taking that decision. Perhaps on the investor segment is not as it is valuable, but like investors typically are people who are familiar with complex data problems, and like analysts are very close to like opening databases and doing statistical analysis. But
Yeah.
perhaps when we go to final consumers, right?
Hmm.
We really can leverage this type of like generative AI technology to say explain things plainly to like the general public, right? And so why is this product that you're buying in Klarna more sustainable than others? I think that's kind of a powerful tool that you can use to like get your data to action.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, and I can see how you can use like recommendation systems to compare like similar investments, but maybe you can just trade your actual investment that have a lower that have a higher emission of gas, and to a similar investment that have like the same role in the portfolio but is
Yeah.
more cleaner. And I yeah, I can, okay, understood. Awesome. So three last questions of this episode, or maybe did you want to add something else?
No, 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 that's probably it.
Awesome. So the three little questions that I have for you at the end are: first one, what so what tips, okay, so we're going to do
This seems like a simple question that is coming.
and this is a simple question. I'm just thinking in myself in what order do I want to do them. No, but first of all, where can people learn more about you? So we'll put the link of the paper when it's out in the description. But when can people learn more about you and maybe reach out?
Yeah, probably. So I'm not a very, social networks kind of guy. I do use LinkedIn, so maybe for professional purposes, that's where kind of I usually post on, you know, advances that I've done or like talks, similar things. So that's probably one of the best ways of looking into it.
Awesome. Second question is, if you had to give any tips for people who are starting in the field or who are interested in AI, data science, and all related data topics, what would you share? What kind of advice would you give?
I think it's so one thing that I don't know if it comes up enough is data science is a tool for solving problems. So you need to first think about the problem that you're trying to solve, identify the needs of your client, and then work backwards from there, right? Um, it's useful to know the different algorithms, but you cannot just like throw a GPT model to every single problem that you find in your life. So kind of, yeah, identify the problem and then just work backwards from there.
Awesome. And last question. And before I ask it, for everyone who is still listening, thanks a lot for turning in all this episode with us. That means a lot. If you enjoyed this content, feel free to subscribe and like this episode. We have more on YouTube, Spotify, Deezer, Apple, and so on. Last question is, and well, thanks, Jaime, for coming on the show and sharing all those very uh, interesting insights in your journey. I
Mhm.
learned a lot. My last question for you is, what would be your message for the Let's Talk AI community? And it can be related to career, it can be professional, it can be personal. You decide.
Mhm. No, thanks for having me. It's been super interesting. So yeah, one message for the community. Um, one that comes to mind is that um, AI tools. AI is a very powerful technology that we've discussed a bit. I think it has a lot of potential to do a lot of good and a lot of potential to do a lot of bad things, right? So I think it's important to think about, what are the products that you're contributing to, and kind of what is the bottom line for the society as a whole. And I think there are, lots of interesting projects that you can work on that are kind of net positive for the planet and for the society. So just yeah, go for it. You can do the difference.
Awesome. Thanks for your time, and I wish you to have an amazing